Well, welcome everybody to Bristech. It's actually the first one this year because of the rescheduled one at the start of the year, which actually is going to be next week. So we've got two Bristechs in consecutive weeks, which is unusual. But warm welcome, and if people want to introduce themselves in the chat window, then do so. Certainly interested to hear about people's backgrounds and also interest in this particular topic. When we do the Q&A after talk, we'll also do questions in the window, and then we'll ask people to unmute. Okay, great. So we have our 3,000th member, Michael McLean. So Michael, if you're on the call, which you're probably not, then yeah, do reach out, and there's a prize for you for our 3,000th member, which I think is a bit of a watershed for us. And for people who are new to Bristech, we began as a meetup back in 2013, then spawned the eponymous conference. Last year we had the MLOps event at which Clive, who's on our panel tonight, was speaking. And then who knows this year? It's a bit of a movable feast at the minute, but we're still in the planning stage. So tonight we have Kieran Billingham, who's going to be talking to us about multi-cloud ML, and joining on the panel session afterwards, we have Iain Wallace and Clive Cox, and I'll introduce you to both just when we start the panel. So the format for tonight is unchanged from previous events. So after this brief intro, we'll then vamp into the talk from Kieran. The Q&A will be then via the chat, and we'll ask people to unmute, and then followed by a panel discussion and close. And we generally keep it to the hour and nice and punchy. So a couple of housekeeping. If people want to turn cameras on, great. A bit of feedback for the speaker. Default is all muted, but I will unmute people after the talk so we can show our appreciation. And as I said earlier, Q&A via the chat. So I would like to introduce Kieran Billingham, Junior Data Scientist at GoCo Group, and has been on a bit of a journey into multi-cloud ML, and is going to tell us a little bit about his experiences and perspectives on multi-cloud. So welcome, Kieran. Do take the stage.
Thank you very much. Share my screen now.
Yep, great. We can see the slides.
Cool. Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for coming. So yeah, it's just a little bit of talk then today about our journey from GoCompare into multi-cloud machine learning. There we go. So we'll start with a bit about me. My interest in data science kind of sparked during my final year of my physics degree. I was doing a lot of signal processing and resolving velocity gradients for energy cascades. Kind of thought it was actually quite nice finding some sort of gold in all that dirt. So I thought, okay, I'll pursue data a bit further. So I did an MSc in data science. I finished last year. During that, I worked at the Admiral Group as a business analyst, gained domain expertise in insurance before moving to GoCompare. I've worked across the majority of the group on projects sort of for brand, for customer experience, product development, and now I work now with our new brand GoDemand to build B2B products and services, sort of connecting us across the board. You can connect to your LinkedIn if you want, or email me at GoCompare, always. So then a bit about this talk. We'll go through a bit of context on GoCompare, our growth into a group, how we figured out where it's best to integrate our data science team, how our infrastructure has become multi-cloud and made our data team feel somewhat siloed, a bit about how we thought our data science processes and the tools we used, an example then of how rethinking those processes and integrating our team differently led to some development success, then a bit covering some personal learnings of mine, and about the things this process has taught me, and a few things that I thought the business has realized over the last year to 6 months that will help us be more effective in the future. So a bit of disclaimer, I am by no means an expert. I'm very junior in the business. I'm not a business leader. I'm not in control of strategic direction. So these views are purely my own and very much from my perspective. I'm just part of that in case anyone from GoCo is watching. And then again, a little bit more about why we're here and why we're all sat on our laptops on Thursday evening instead of drinking wine. Our director, Luis, gave a talk back in September where he addressed the importance of data ops for making impact with data in a business. It's a really good talk and you should check it out. And a couple of things really stuck with me from that. So the first then is this reported figure that 87% of data science projects fail before they reach production or sort of return value. And two, that the right tool at the right time, the right place is really critical to success. And finally, the diagram on the right there, just emphasizing that improving data impact is reliant on growing business tools and teams, processes, and business relationships concurrently. So after listening to Lisa's talk and talking a little bit with Nick, I started to think about how we change these three things to help us work towards achieving a success rate much higher than 13%. And embracing multi-cloud and opening up our team has had a really good impact on that. So I thought, given the opportunity, I'd share it with everyone, just share my view. So a bit about GoCompare then. We launched in 2006 with the first car insurance comparison site to focus on quality insurance along with price. Much like the original iPhone, we were really revolutionary to the market at the time, but our competitor soon jumped on board and our sort of USB slipped. USB even, not USB. We worked then to modernize our infrastructure and our tech, and we improved customer service and the experience you got. We slowly expanded our product offering for comparison, much like Apple refined the iPhone and expanded the App Store. Then through this, then we became the first and only comparison site to be invited to join BIBA, which is the British Insurance Brokers Association. And that was sort of recognition for our philosophy of comparing products on their suitability for the individual, not just on price. So in 2016, we listed as a group. We really diverted from what we were working in and invested in different financial products, sort of spreading our wings and creating this ecosystem that we've grown over time now through acquisitions of businesses like My Voucher Codes, Energy Links, and Look After My Bills. That means we now operate in sort of these three main markets. We've got comparison rewards and autosave and sort of the brands there that sit in between them. So, we have this group now, and where does data science fit in that? So this bit's a little bit off tangent for the topic, but I wanted to include it because I'm definitely seeing a lot of investment in data teams across the board and growing. And I think what we've seen is that, a well-funded data team, a big data team, if it's in the wrong place, is still not effective. It's probably a smaller team that's in the right place. So just wanted to sort of cover these models just to sort of get people talking about them really. So we've got the Center of Excellence model here, which is the most centralized of all the models. Data science teams work independently, they build prototypes, they innovate. And it's really good if you've got low coupling to your data science work to your existing products or tech. But obviously you run the risk of building solutions that lack any context to the business, and then you never quite close that loop by getting them adopted by the team. And the other one then, the accounting model, you've got data scientists there as your detectives, you're producing reports and presentations, but then really you're sort of waiting for these investigations to come up and look into these root causes, and you're never really getting attached to the work or to the product. You've then got the consultant model here, where work comes in via tickets and managed, and it's really heavily managed. It's definitely the easiest and the cheapest way to integrate a team. But you've got this communication overhead. It can be a little bit under-fulfilling for data scientists as well, because you rarely see results from your work. We kind of worked under these guys for a little bit when we were a lot younger as a team. But as demand for data science grew within the business, it became almost impossible to cover all the product areas that we needed to and allocate resource fairly to those that really needed it. Then the last one here then is the embedded model. So rather than having a data science team, you have independent data scientists that are hired by product teams, and they work completely on their own. And they're, the benefit of that is that all these teams have security, that they've got a dedicated resource, but it means that you don't get these standardized processes, and therefore your best practices, they slip. So you have this sort of one in the middle then, which is where we've settled on, which is the product data science model. And it sits in between the extremes of the embedded and the center of excellence models. And here data scientists simultaneously exist within the data science function and the product team. And a really important benefit to this model is that data scientists have really clear ownership of their projects. And then the integration with the product team means that they gain a really thorough understanding of the product and its potential. And that close collaboration leads to better quality data. So you get less issues. So every release has the effect of changing that data. And if you have a representative there before the release goes out, you're less likely to get anything going wrong. The centralized aspect of the model then means that data scientists can come together and they can build best practices and support growth through code reviews and work analysis. And you have a dedicated data science manager who can better assess the impact and plan for career growth of your team as well. Obviously, the method has some drawbacks. There's a lot of people involved, so cost is really high. And to follow the model properly, you need a data scientist for every product that you have, which for a small business like GoCompare that has a lot of products for our size, it's a really difficult thing to do. And obviously the strain it would put on management if they had to keep tabs on a huge portfolio of parallel projects would be awful. So at GoCo, we've kind of taken this model and instead of grouping into product teams, we've grouped into squads that are strategically aligned to the business goals. So it could be that one quarter, we've got a squad that's purely trying to do something about the customer experience. So they're really aligned to that. So you're having the right buy-in for everyone in the business and you're closely drawn into that problem. So it's a little off topic, but it's just some food for thought, especially if you're interviewing for new positions and you're new to the industry. Find out how the team is structured that you're looking to, because it has a really significant impact on your day-to-day role. Just something to go over. So back at GoCompare anyway, we are very much a Microsoft house. When I started back in 2019, which is not long ago really, Macs were like unicorns in the office, and Azure was the golden child that everyone was really obsessing over. And for one business, sticking to one platform has an awful lot of benefits. You've got this central point to manage all your access. So admin is really simple. Levers and joiners are really easy to add into systems. You've got collaboration easily between all your different services and between your staff because every service is built with the rest of the ecosystem in mind. And your costs are likely to be lower generally. And also if you have any issues, you've only got one company to ring up and blame. And for me, someone who's really new to the industry, that singular platform view is really well aligned to what I've seen in modules university and industry conferences. I kind of have a bias view on these conferences that they give you this really polarized view because they're sponsored events and they've chosen their speakers that will sing praises about their platforms in most cases and how integrating with Azure or AWS has saved the world and making billions. And you're always getting these best case scenarios where development is free from legacy systems, security requirements, or politics of the business. And it gave me a bit of a sense, a false sense of security of how easy it would be to come in with these fresh ideas and push products out the door like a well-oiled sort of machine. And it kind of did work for GoCompare.com. If we look at the singular brand, we've got data science projects that can be run entirely in Azure. They can be built pretty much end-to-end by the team in Databricks. And we've got the data in the Delta Lake. We control our pipelines with Databricks and DevOps, and then we can serve either from Azure ML or from Databricks directly. And that's really great. But the problem is we've grown as a business through acquisitions, and acquisitions mean that you inherit new tech stacks all the time. And the cost of migrating a product or a whole brand over to another service is vast. And it's not really necessary to the development of most work. And definitely if the sort of product development is, they would see it. But for a data team, however, a split and decentralized data stack is a bit of a pain. And we naturally want this single point of truth and this beautiful crystal blue data lake that we can fish in for insight. And we don't have to keep moving lakes to catch different fish because it's just frustrating for us. So at first we were working towards this sort of unified data platform system. And we'd onboard these new businesses into our group data platform in Azure. And the aim was to continue to have this single point for ingestion, analysis, and serving of data. And we'd have complete control over it as the group data team. But in reality, the resource and the cross-cloud knowledge required to do that, even for one product, is really quite big. And it's really disruptive for your ongoing development of that product. So we've kind of stopped that now. And now we have a toolkit that looks a bit more like this. And this is just a few. We've got multiple brands now existing within the group, running from completely different but appropriate architectures, making the most of the expertise that they have within their teams to continue to innovate and grow their products. But now our simplified pipeline that's sat within Azure is really quite lost in all of these tools that the organization has to offer. And so how does data science now integrate with that? If we're placed with the product teams, but working in Databricks workspaces that aren't connected to the product's data, what use are we? Sure, we can copy over data, we can do some analysis, we can copy it back. We can create just static models, and we did that for a while. But then you have to go back to the drawing board and think, why are we working here? Is this really how we want to be working? Because we're limiting what we can do for the business. It's really important to emphasize here that, a multi-cloud strategy is generally preferable for a lot of businesses. You avoid things like vendor lock-in, and you can help keep your services more compliant. If you need a specific location of a data center, and if you're trying to make your applications more resilient to downtime. But it will change how you work as a data scientist and a team, because it adds that layer of complexity into anything that you do that you need to account for. So the next section then, we're looking on things that as a function and team, we needed to rethink in order to accommodate this new varied stack. And the easiest place to start then is your workspace. And when I joined GoCompare, Databricks was the center for all things DS, and I never really asked why. Obviously, it's a completely managed platform. It's a really good product, but for a lot of the work we were doing or being asked to do at the time, it was kind of overkill, and all the extra steps involved in the security of that and learning how to code in PySpark and understand Spark and Scala were hampering progress. And it was much easier to work in Python, realistically. And if we want to work on this odd piece of analysis, then a Jupyter notebook still has its place. You can connect it to compute if you need it. Else you've got VMs with almost identical images hosted by each different cloud provider that are really easy to maintain. So there's so many other options of where you work. You don't always have to go straight into that managed system. And for a lot of small tasks, definitely working locally or working on a VM is much easier. But obviously, if you have got these fully managed services that you're paying for and you want to make use of as a business, then sure, go straight to them. And also be aware that you don't need to go through this middleman. You could go straight to Azure ML or SageMaker and cut out a service like Databricks. So I guess step one to us kind of rethinking about how we were working is to definitely stop and ask yourself, where should I work with this project? What makes sense? And then step two then is to rethink if you're even the best person to be working on that part of the project. So in the Symphony we had originally, the data science team had complete control of the whole sort of raw data to monitoring pipeline. And in that most simple state and environment, sure, we'd keep everything in Azure. That pipeline would be lovely, built by one person, and deployment would be a breeze. We'd get them out really quickly. But in a business, when you have anything connected to your central data platform, you may need to give some ownership over to other people in the pipeline. And here we've got a few examples where you're making better use of the business around you. If you don't need raw data, you can ask data engineering to give you that gold standard. You can hand it off to MLOps to serve. Or if the brand doesn't have a dedicated engineering team, you can work closely with the brand team to get data, work with them again in the future to figure out how and when it should be best to serve the model. It could well be that they don't need a live running model, and that some ad hoc analysis or a report once a month is just as significant. And in that respect, that's still a successful pipeline. So, I could go on, there's a lot on here. But the point is, you don't need to have control of every step in your project. If you have the right relationships, you should feel really comfortable trusting your colleagues with it. So step 3 follows on from this one again. If you've given up some control, it may be then that your team is working, the team that are working on this aren't as comfortable working in the tech stack that you are. So, or maybe that the data or the resources exist in an environment that you don't usually use for dev. In this case, you should be flexible to move your workspace into the platform that best suits the overall pipeline of the project. And yes, that could involve some significant investment in upskilling yourself as a data scientist, but in the long run, it will give you a much better grasp on the product as a whole. It will allow you to access the ingestion or the serving conversations that would otherwise be really inaccessible to you. And the more platforms you're familiar with, the easier it will be to find work in the future, I'm sure. So the next thing then is rather cheesy, but rethinking who your data science team is. So if everyone in your business is involved and committed to building these data science products and data-led insight, then you'll find that getting infrastructure barriers slip away, and people are much more willing to experiment when they have interest in the success of the project. And really, this is all about communication, isn't it? we're quite bad, I think, as techie people, at sort of sitting behind our laptops and trying to forget that there's a whole business going on around us. And if you make sure you bring in the right people early on and you get them invested, then they're much more willing to give you their support when you need it. So that's a bit preachy. So I'll give you a bit of an example then of how we've used that rethinking process then to bring together a product across 2 of our brands and 2 different cloud providers. So the price prediction project was born out of a desire for us to extract some value from the 65,000 quotes and 6.8 million car insurance prices that we see on GoCompare on a daily basis. And then for GoDemand, which is our new SaaS platform, we want to use these quotes to build a prediction API that we could give to partners in order to allow their customers to access the savings often found by visiting comparison sites. But the problem was GoCompare quotes are fed into the Azure Data Lake. GoDemand's whole platform is completely independent and runs on AWS. There's no crossover between the tech teams or anything like that, so we're the only link. Initially, we thought about building the product end-to-end in Azure. We'd serve it via an IPA, but there wasn't really enough knowledge within our data science team, truthfully, to complete that in a timely manner. And we didn't have the ongoing tech support to maintain what would be a paid-for service with an SLA. So we had to rethink it. And instead, we looked at these previous steps in the slides and we decided the following, that we would draw on the knowledge of our data engineering team to build us this live stream of quotes that would come into the data science environment in Databricks. We then would clean and register that as a gold standard data source using the knowledge we have of insurance and of the product that we're involved in, that the data engineering team don't necessarily get to see. Then the model development, the updating, and performance evaluation would all happen within our familiar environment so that we could see that on a daily basis and maintain it ourselves. And then we'd hand over control of the serving to the GoDemand team. And it's a really simple solution. The model and its associated files are sent over to an S3 bucket, triggers the build of a container that the model was then served from, obviously pushed to SageMaker. Monitoring of the serving of the model falls under the brand's remit. And then we just support them on that in a sort of consultancy style role. Seems like a really simple solution, but it meant that tech needed to understand an awful lot more about the requirements of a machine learning model and the intricacies of building a data science pipeline. And then we had to understand more about the tech that the product was going to exist within. So how does it, we had this issue at the beginning that we needed it to be serverless, and actually we couldn't get it small enough to run on in a serverless environment. It's the effect that has then on the knock-on of the rest of the platform. There's odd little nuances like that that usually don't really enter our brainwave when we're building these products. So I also needed to learn these steps and needed to learn how to maintain these across 2 different platforms. So we could build, we experiment, we could serve, and then working closely then with another team to build this environment is great because you're working in this shared space. No one's encroaching on else's territory, so you're naturally more collaborative and you can build up all your monitoring and tooling in a way that will serve you both. And it meant that we had a lot less back and forth because everyone was happy, everyone was sharing these roles. And then this is kind of a simplified view of what we ended up with. So we've got the pipeline then split into 2 main areas. We've got data science control in the Databricks at the top, where these models coming in, then GoDemand controlling the AWS environment at the bottom. But we're having to work very closely with them to ensure that the service is running, it's undisruptive. We can deliver products of car insurance that are reliable and accurate. But also if we have a disruption on our end, the worst case scenario is the model doesn't get dated. Their service will still continue to run. So the service level agreement is still on their hands. It's just up to us to make sure that we're giving them the best prices that we possibly can. So then I guess sort of cover off then a few learnings that we've had from it. I'm going to steal, our director of data loves a good analogy, so I did this one for him. If you were tasked with building a house, you'd want to really get to know the customer and the architect, the ground and the materials, and then if you're given a toolkit, you'd say, okay, great. And in order for you to know if you could build that house, you need to be really familiar with what's in that toolkit and what they all did. And I think when you start a new business, if you're told your job is to hammer, it's really easy to just take the hammer out of the kit, close the lid until you need something else. But for me, this experience has taught me that You just take everything out of that kit as soon as you can. You understand what everything does and what it could do. It doesn't matter if you never have to use I don't know, a wire stripper or a specific drill bit, but it's really important that you know what it does do and who in the business is using it. So, one, to know why you're keeping it in the toolbox to start with, and two, where it is and who you need to go to if you ever do. And, when I joined at GoCompare, I was really obsessed with learning as much about Spark and Databricks and Azure as I possibly could. But I really should have taken a step back to look at the overall blueprint, because it would have allowed me to see a lot of these barriers that we faced this last year with these sort of siloed data stacks that at the time felt quite demoralizing to me, to be honest, because you're putting all this effort and you're getting nothing back in return. But if you can see the bigger picture, you can see how you need to unlock those, and it's a lot easier. Another probably obvious lesson is to ask 100 times more questions. When you're new to a business, it's so easy to be quiet and observe, but you're not really helping anyone or yourself by doing that. And if you are following this data science product model, you'll be expected to know the inside of the product, inside out. And that only happens by asking the right questions and, admitting that you can look a little bit stupid sometimes. Especially, I don't know what it is about financial services, but I've never known anyone use so many acronyms, and they'll all just look at you as though you should know exactly what they are. And I don't know why I've never been in a company that's given you a dictionary of them, and someone should do that. And then lastly, I guess, don't be afraid to stray from your lane a bit. Just because you're a plumber doesn't mean you can't help an electrician run some wires. It doesn't mean you can't help a carpenter fit a door. And in the same way as a data scientist, especially as a junior, give yourself time to experiment with the work that your data engineering team does, that your data ops team does, that your tech ops team does, that all your colleagues are experts in, and really draw on that knowledge, but also improve your own. And it kind of helps you build these relationships, and it helps you get a better sense of where you fit in the machine. And if for whatever reason those people aren't there one day, it means that everything doesn't have to grind to a halt, the house is going to fall down. You can just keep going, and then when they're back, you can work with them to make it even better. So this last year we've undergone a lot of changes, and they don't seem like big changes really, infrastructure wise, but we've had a few big changes in leadership and our vision. And actually, we've managed to change the opinion of data science around the business to a lot more positive spin. People now see that we can create a lot of value really simply, and that we're not trying to bring everyone in, and we're not trying to be the center of excellence. What we're trying to do is to make these improvements on the business. And some of them are really, really small, and some of them are slightly bigger, like new project launches, like the price predictor. But we have, we're getting there. And we've got an awful lot of work that we need to do to connect all our brands and to empower the business. But I guess as an end note, it's just continuing to have those conversations and making sure that if you're ever not really sure why you're doing something or why you're using a tool, then to stop yourself in your tracks and question it, because the chances are you already have the solution there. You just need to rethink it. So that is the end. Thank you for letting me ramble on. I know it's not a topic that we usually see visited by sort of such a junior person in the business. So that's really grateful, Nick, for having me to talk about this. And then I guess I should put the thanks for hiring slide up, because no one's actually asked me to from work, but I'm sure if I didn't, I'd get told off for not. So we're always hiring. If you ever want to talk to one of us about our careers, then send us a LinkedIn or look on our careers website, and they're always happy to chat. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kieran. I'll ask everyone to unmute if that's okay. We can show our appreciation. Thank you. So are there any questions? And if you've got questions, do you want to put them in the chat? I've kicked it off with a couple there. If you don't mind me picking my own question to start off with. Well, I'll give a second. If people have questions, to just pop them in there. So, Kieran, one thought I had was whether do you think that there you said that you're using a fully managed service. Do you feel that by using a fully managed service, you actually lose or some of the intuition about how actually things are rigged together? Is it disempowering in a sense?
I wouldn't say it's disempowering. I think it discourages you from learning more about the service you're using, because you're abstracted from it completely. You're just using this really nice UI and it does everything for you. So I definitely think for someone who's more junior, it makes sense to look past that. But when it comes to actually getting things into production and being efficient, then a managed service, there's a reason why they're so expensive, and people pay for them. It's because it is empowering. It helps you get things done quicker. But yeah, definitely, if you're talking about the intuition of how things are working together, then yeah, it makes you more abstracted from that.
Okay, so my fears are maybe slightly founded then, perhaps. I don't know.
I think possibly. I think it depends on the opinion you take on it. From a business's perspective, it means that you can have people coming in and making action straight away. But from an individual trying to learn and develop, then potentially it's not such a good thing.
And you mentioned in your talk that you said that sort of the data scientist needs to understand the data engineering and the other way around. So in your experience of that journey, have you found that you've blurred into a data engineer at times, or how distinct have the roles been kept?
So we're a really small team, so you're always going to get this crossover at some level, and I think it depends on who your team is. So we have generally a really flexible group of people that are really willing to blend those roles. I wouldn't say I've had to take on a data engineering role at all, but I definitely get involved in conversations sometimes that are definitely not my forte, and they're not the sort of things that definitely wouldn't be on my job description. But getting involved in those conversations helps you do your job, so that makes sense. And likewise, the data engineers, when they all joined the business, data science didn't exist, so their processes that they've been doing for years do need to change to support us, and it's really important that's a two-way conversation.
Okay, great, thanks. We have a question from Iain. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. It was two things. One is an observation that just stuck out is you mentioned about acronyms. It could be worse. You could work in defence. For anyone's interested, I've dumped the link there, which is the list of the MOD acronyms and abbreviations, which is 20,000 acronyms. Anyway, in the single PDF. Anyway, my question is, you're talking a lot about the challenges of multi-cloud and how ways you work to them and overcome them, but what do you see as the advantages? I mean, I guess you talked a bit about the advantages to you personally in learning a bunch of different tools, but what do you see as the advantages to the business? Is it all bad?
Definitely not all bad. I think there's an awful lot more positive than there is bad. So we spoke before, vendor lock-ins, an obvious one. Do you want to be building all your services and be completely tied to one provider? You end up in this position where they have you over a barrel, especially as you grow as a business and they know that you're a bit of a cash cow. They are known for having quite odd pricing structures, some of them, and if you're tied to one of them, then you're more likely to get taken advantage of for that. But obviously the flip side of that is that it generally is more expensive to say multi-cloud, so you have to remember that as well. Otherwise, for us, the positives of multi-cloud is that we're bringing in new people into the business through these acquisitions. And if we suddenly, they were hired probably because they were very good at working with the services that they were using at the time. If we suddenly make them use something else, we're wasting all of that expertise, which is a real shame. And if anything, it's quite detrimental to progress. So having that multi-cloud opens you up and able to bring in a more diverse range of talent. You're not so selective on where you need people to come from, because it doesn't matter. You've got it all. You're happy for them to work wherever they're more suited. I think that's probably my key advantages. And obviously the ease in which you can get things deployed. If you're not worried about moving data and portability and things like that, and you can instead move where you're working, that's a lot quicker.
Cool, great. So are there any other questions, or we'll vamp into the panel if that's okay? Going. Okay, great. So I'm now going to introduce Clive Cox, who's the CTO of Selden. Welcome. And Selden focused on cloud native deployment tooling for ML. And Iain, who we've also heard from there. So the newly minted CTO of De Gould, who are focused on the automotive sector. So I guess just as a vamp, there was one statistic there, Kieran, in the 87% of projects that don't actually make it into production. Do you think that is still true in 2021? Is that assertion, or is that now much lower?
I can't attest for what's happening in other industries, other businesses. It's definitely not that high for us. Are 100% of our products in a stage of production that we're happy with? Probably not. But are they in production? Are they providing value? Yes, it's definitely a lot higher than 13%. Is that because of an explosion in tool support? I don't know. Or is it just because people are being much more flexible now with what they expect a delivery to look like?
And I guess the motivation for multi-cloud within GoCo is, you explain quite clearly in terms of the integration of brands and then working out the model to fit that. What are the are the other motivations for multi-cloud? Is business agility part of that? Is cost a part of that?
Yeah, that's not so much a problem for me, I guess. But yeah, costs are a big thing. The cost of bringing these new businesses onto a single cloud platform is expensive. And the cost of that would definitely outweigh any savings you'd get from going onto one cloud. We are a regulated environment, so we need to keep all of our data within the UK. Sometimes some things can go into Northern Europe, but not much. And obviously, the more cloud providers you're linked up to, the more data centers you have access to. That really helps, obviously, for resilience of services, things like that. So I think that's probably a good reason to continue to stay multi-cloud, but I can't attest that that's a motivation for the business. But it's definitely a good reason for doing it.
And Clive, from your perspective, from Selden's perspective, how common is multi-cloud? And I guess we maybe need to differentiate here between multi-cloud and hybrid cloud.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for us, it's obviously coming from a different angle because we're cloud native. So, I mean, we're focusing, all our products run on Kubernetes. So all our customers are customers who have bought into running Kubernetes as the way to go. And the way we see it, two things really. I mean, one is that we've seen a lot of customers think about multi-cloud. We'll talk a lot about it, but not actually do anything there. But one way they are doing it is via Kubernetes, is to use the ideas of GitOps. So I mean, storing your infrastructure on source control, and then their ideas obviously of staging, development, production could be multi-cloud. You could have then if you want to switch between them, then you can, the infrastructure is all pushed to some source control, and then you can start up another cluster somewhere else, bring it back online on that other cluster. So, but in reality, actually,
do you think that's an ideal, like cloud native as an abstraction? It doesn't really matter where it's. Is that sort of an abstraction that's kind of like one step too far? People actually want to know where the stuff's running.
I think it's simplifying the actual usage of the core APIs. I think it depends what you're using multi-cloud for. If you're going for the core services provided by each of those clouds and you're buying into those services on Azure and AWS, then obviously you're gaining benefit from that. But if you're creating your own products, then which you're going to be putting on something like a Kubernetes platform, so you're using it more for microservice, large server farms and stuff, then Kubernetes gives you one set of APIs you need to learn. So I suppose that would be my question back to sort of Kieran, or several questions really. Is like, do you think you're increasing the sort of technical debt in the company by having all these different services? I mean, in terms of, you've got to have experts on AWS, on Azure, or everything, and as your company grows, is that a good thing?
I think as long as the company continues to grow in the way that it is growing, that will be fine. But obviously, yeah, we're very aware that you're making things more complicated than they necessarily need to be for these sort of short-term benefits, and making sure that continues into the long term comes into the strategy. So I can't necessarily make comment on that. But yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. If you're using it as a platform as a service, it's very different to using it as infrastructure as a service. And if you're using it as infrastructure, then you're not as attached to it, and you don't have as much depth.
Well, could it also cut both ways? Because if you're using multi-cloud, then presumably people are building a CV there. Exposure to lots of different tooling and across different platforms. So maybe we could talk about the people side of this. Some of the people issues, the skills gap how you find people with the right skills. Presumably, multi-cloud is just more difficult because you're trying to cover more technologies.
So was that a question for me or for Kieran?
Oh yeah, just throw it out there. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think that's definitely one of the challenges. I think that's why, I mean, in our case, for Kubernetes, say, and people just focusing on AWS, there's so many edge cases that we have of different aspects, just handling that one customer, you know, in a large customer who has a Kubernetes cluster on AWS, that's challenging enough. I think when you get to large scale and complex applications, that I think it's definitely putting more risk there. I mean, I see the understanding of in the insurance domain, if you're trying to spread your compliance out by having using multi-cloud, and that's definitely one of the core reasons that you would use it, or if you're taking advantage of particular services. But I see there's a lot of risks you're adding, and I would say it's actually you're increasing your vendor lock-in, because you're basically having vendor lock-in on now all the clouds, because it's going to be tough to change those services. You've got skill sets in those services. You know, you've got your data now on different services, which are going to be hard to move. So I would say there's a risk there, but I see Iain wants to interject.
Yeah, it's just you made me think when you talk about the lock-in, and I think it's interesting to think who's locking in who here, right? Because the GoCo example, they've expanded, added other companies, and they are locked into their vendors or their technology. But if you're, you can imagine a different sort of company where you're providing, I guess, more of the B2B example, you're providing services for someone else, and they might require things are hosted in a certain cloud or the data sits in a certain place. I mean, you mentioned a hybrid with on-prem where, you know, stuff has to happen in particular places. It could be because the data can't move or it's too prohibitively expensive. So I guess, and then to touch back on the people thing, I wonder if you get the lock-in because of the skills issues as well. So I don't know if I'm making a point so much as just generally rambling. I think it's, I wonder, maybe to bring us back to Kieran, is, I mean, I guess the thesis of what you're saying is, hey, it's okay to go multi-cloud, so you can kind of live with a bit of lock-in from a sort of technical perspective. But which, just in your opinion, do you think has been the strongest lock-in? Do you think that it's been the lock-in because of people's skills, it's been the lock-in because of where the data is, or because of a particular technology or service?
I think it's definitely just the services we have set up are, you know, we're very much using it as a platform. So it becomes much more difficult to migrate away from it. You know, moving data is easy. It's not cheap, but it's easy. But moving whole applications is not when they're linked to a platform. So I'd say that's why we're so locked in now. And I guess as well for skills for people, it's a little bit like when I see so many like data science roles advertised for, and they're very picky on what programming language they want you to be able to use. Really, you know, they're all the same. If you can code, you can code. You just need to pick up a new one if you join a new company. I think businesses are getting into that trap where they're saying we need people with Azure experience. That's what we really want. And actually, we have the benefit that we have people that are, you know, across all of the platforms now. So it's quite easy really to transition between the two. I've definitely done most of my training in Azure, but found it quite easy to pick up things in AWS because they're really all the same. They're just marketed slightly differently, aren't they?
Yeah, it's a fair point. So you're saying that sort of moving data is easy. Presumably, there's also a cost implication of moving data. There's also the nature of the data itself. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to pick him up on that point as well, and on a couple of bases, which is, one is, so I went to a very interesting talk where the Met Office's CIO was talking about their cloud infrastructure. And for moving their data into AWS, they had a pair of 100 gigabit fibers plus multiple AWS snowmobiles, as in articulated lorries full of hard drives to shift all their data. So if you're up in the petabytes, it's maybe not that, well, certainly not cheap.
Yeah, I think I was talking about more in principle.
Okay, and then the other thing is, again, it's kind of a similar thing. The thing that I've spent a lot of time thinking about is where you've got any sort of edge compute, where it's maybe not a case of you don't want to move the data or it's really expensive, is you just can't. The bandwidth is just not there, is never going to be there. And there's a whole other thing you could talk about, what is edge. Depending on who you speak to, they're talking about a rack machine with 8 GPUs in some switching gear for a telco, or you're talking about an FPGA with intermittent connectivity. And I think,
But is edge really dependent on use case again? Then it comes down to actually what you're trying to achieve. If you can't actually do the compute, can't get the data to the cloud, and you have to do it on the edge, then it's just a needs must situation.
yeah, I think so, and I think it will change through time, right? What's edge compute now is not in the future. Bandwidths and latencies change, and so on and so forth. And I kind of bring it up because I don't know if I was going to add here, but I think it's an interesting topic and how much of the cloud tooling can be used to support edge computing. Because you have a lot of this, it's kind of the same problems on a different scale. I mean, containers come out of a desire to move the compute to where the data is. This is kind of the same problem, etc. You have machines coming on and offline, or operational and operational, etc. There's a lot of the same things.
Is that just an extension of hybrid cloud though? You've got your on-prem, which could be embedded, or and then you've got your cloud version.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose partly, but I think, we're seeing hybrid cloud used a lot in telcos. So, in other cases of where they want their sort of commercially sensitive data on-prem, and then there's some of the other services they'll run in the cloud, but they want an easy way to sort of move between the two of some of the services sort of at will. So this is where things like sort of Google Anthos are really starting to take off in that sector. So obviously you're still locked into Google on the higher level service, but you can choose AWS or Google to run your cloud stuff, and also have the on-prem cluster and move between the two using similar ideas to sort of get up. So we see that much more as a driver and some very big telcos. Oh, I think there's an echo.
Yeah, I think it's your own echo. Do carry on.
Yeah, I think I've pretty much finished that point. Yeah, I mean, that's where we're seeing hybrid cloud is much more where we're seeing there's a drive from certainly the larger telcos, and say that area, maybe some of the fintechs are looking at that area rather than saying multi-cloud as a driver for their business. But I think it's also interesting, there was actually like a Gartner report, which I found just in terms of researching this, where I've put in the chat, which is actually looking at this and saying, why are people going to sort of multi-cloud? And they say it was like, are you doing it like intentionally or so unintentionally? And their figures are sort of 10% now. People are on multi-cloud, and they think it's going to increase. And they give like a wide range of reasons, which I don't completely believe. But I mean, there's the standard stuff of compliance, and things surrounding that. Selecting the best of breed services, and also allowing you to add the sort of competitive pressure if you're a large enough company, if you're using multi-cloud. So I mean, in their opinion, it's certainly growing. So I just thought I'd drop that in there for people who are interested in going.
Yeah. So you're saying the multi-cloud is currently the minority.
Definitely.
Yeah, but there might be specific reasons that you would go down that route. And obviously, we've heard one tonight, which has been, buying other businesses that are using different cloud providers, which is a business agility reason perhaps.
Definitely.
So for coming back to maybe just to touch on the data portability aspect again, how do you think sort of decisions that are made quite early in the process can have quite major downstream implications? And I'm really thinking about maybe if you're saying this is the way that we've always done it, and our data's always been there, then there's a sort of a data inertia to actually moving platform data or platform. Is that a factor, or do you think I'm sort of over egging that?
No, I think that's definitely a factor. I mean, just before we get things into sort of modern data structures, we're trying to get businesses moving away from SQL services. It's difficult enough as it is, and there's a lot of work involved in a lot of overheads. So that's definitely something we've struggled with is getting it moved into a place that is useful for data science. So again, having it moved again, I think the businessy is we've just paid to have this put in a lake and to be modern in that sense. Why are we then thinking about moving it somewhere else? So there's that sort of inertia that people feel like they don't want to keep pushing changes through, but then also they want to keep seeing changes in the business. So you almost have to weigh that up as how much they're willing to give in order to get possibility for us, our data is not massive. We're talking, terabytes rather than petabytes, but it's growing all the time. And the issue with us is that it's all personal data and it's heavily protected. So there's a risk involved in moving it that really I think the business would rather stay away from unless they really have to.
Yeah, so that's the risk, the risk argument for
And whether that's a real risk or just perceived, I don't think really matters to a lot of people in the business. It's just the idea that there's that threat that you see what happens to industries that try and move their data or try and move their platforms and it goes wrong. And that's your whole organization ruined, essentially, especially for someone like us who are, we target ourselves as the customer champion. And if we go around losing your personal data, then that's our reputation ruined, essentially. And I think that's a lot of problems. And I think that's why a lot of people, for one, won't move away from the hybrid cloud models where they want to keep all that data on-prem, where the worst case scenario is they lose it, but at least they lose it and it's gone. They don't lose it to the web, I
suppose there's one question I'd like to ask Kieran is from your diagrams, it looked like for certain parts of machine learning lifecycle, you use certain clouds. So like for AWS, it sounds like it's more for serving and the data science are using more Azure. Is that the way you think you'll go forward? So different parts of the MLOps will be certain clouds or not? It's going to be completely heterogeneous.
Yeah, I think that's the aim. So, if we're working on data that lives in AWS, then it makes sense to build it there. If it's also going to be served there, there's no sense in moving it over. But I guess it's just a case of finding the right use case to get the business to invest in doing that. So at the moment, the approach we've had, the data has always been, well, the majority of the data has always been in our Azure environment anyway. So then it's been more about where we're going to serve it to. Whereas I think when we get a situation the way around where we're getting more data in from one of our new businesses, which is what's happening now with Look After My Bills, they're growing rapidly and they've got probably more data coming in on a daily basis than we expected. So we should start looking at building products in their environment now. So I think that's what I'm hoping for the future. But obviously there's a lot of overheads with that. Suddenly you've got 2 or 3 platforms that you need to maintain. And if you've got multiple services running each of those platforms, then you need more DevOps support in order to do that. And you need more data scientists that are comfortable working across all 3 and that can switch quite quickly because it's not very often you're working on one project at a time.
Yeah, so you're saying that the multi-cloud needs the agility from in terms of roles and people to be able to be a bit of a chameleon and change to what is needed.
Yeah, it's about getting in the right headspace. I think that your role is your role and you can do it wherever. Whether I'm working on this laptop or my laptop or in the cloud or on Databricks, I'm still doing the same basic processes. It just changes slightly the way that you have to work. And I think as soon as you get in your head that that's perfectly fine and people do it all the time, it's much easier to be agile and work between them. Mm-hmm. But I think it's definitely more of a change of thought than it is actual effort in learning new services because they're quite simple to pick up. And there's so many free resources online that there's no excuse for not really.
Yeah. And maybe so. And finally, maybe we should close on to Clive. Maybe coming back to the Selden point of view. I mean, you're to some degree cloud native, therefore agnostic of these choices. But you're coming very much from the a supplier perspective on this particular item.
Yeah, I mean that's the advantage that we see is that obviously we're creating our own products to run on Kubernetes, and the companies we work for are happy to bring all their products into Kubernetes. So they're not necessarily using services, APIs from clouds in particular. So they're happy to have that sort of neutral platform and have that as a base as their skill set, which may be just a much smaller skill set surrounding it to manage those clusters. So it just decreases their risk and it gives them the opportunity to move and have on-prem and other aspects. So yeah, I mean, I'd like to ask Kieran, have you thought of cloud native? Or I'm not trying to sell, but just out of interest, what is it?
I don't know, truthfully. I'm not sure if that's something that the business has thought about or not. Those are conversations that I'm not generally privy to until after the decision's been made, and then I just have to deal with it.
And Iain, you're going sort of from an edge, and De Gaulle, are they? Is it a multi-cloud environment, or yeah? Presumably you don't quite know yet.
So yeah, it's cloud compute for a lot of it. You can think of it like their systems as effectively it's automotive inspection systems. So it's a perception system hooked up to a cloud backend. And the angle I think when the kind of interesting thing, or maybe it's either a thing that makes edge different or the same, right? Is we've been talking about data. Data isn't just a thing that you transfer and then it's somewhere else, right? I mean, when Kieran's talking about the problems of moving the data, what you're actually talking about is the problems of moving the plumbing that makes the data appear, right? It's the mechanisms that gets the data into the system. And if that is a whole Azure stack or whatever, then that's where the data is coming in. That's where the data hose is. And for edge, or to take the De Gaulle case, where does the data come from? It doesn't just exist somewhere statically. It's coming in as millions of images of vehicles. And you can't just move that, because you move that at a point in time, you've got to keep moving it, right? So it's these streams of data, I think, are characterize it. These kind of, well, both problems really, but I think it's another reason not to move, I guess. Where's your data coming from, and does it ever stop? In a lot of use cases, it just doesn't.
Great. I think any final thoughts? We've run out of time. Kieran, Clive, anything to add?
Nope.
So many thanks to Kieran for your presentation tonight. Thanks for your comments, Clive, and to Iain. All of our content is recorded, and you can catch up on replay at that web address. And our next event is actually going to be next week. We are going to be talking Apache Flink with Marta from Viverica, who are one of the founders of Apache Flink. So it's a streaming event. And very pleased, you will have spotted the names at the bottom of the slides. We are sponsored in 2021 by GoCo Group, Oracle Cloud, Storm Consultancy, and OVO. And we're really pleased to have such a great lineup this year of sponsors. So thanks very much to everybody. That's the top of the hour. And many thanks to Kieran. And hopefully we will see you next week. Thank you.
Great, thank you. It's very
Thank you.